That meal isn't for someone like you. Claire Whitmore's voice sliced through the quiet first-class cabin so sharply that conversation stopped in mid-sentence. Every head turned toward seat 1A, where Danielle Brooks looked up from the leather-bound notebook resting on her lap. Claire didn't even glance at the boarding pass tucked neatly beside Danielle's phone. She didn't check the catering manifest glowing on the service tablet in her hand. She simply looked at Danielle's plain cream sweater, dark jeans, and calm expression, then decided she already knew everything that mattered. With one practiced motion, Claire lifted the silver tray that had been resting on Danielle's table. The card attached to the edge read, "Brooks, 1A, CEO Special Request." Claire tore the card away before anyone else could read it, folded it once, slipped it into the pocket of her uniform apron, and carried the perfectly prepared filet, roasted vegetables, and warm bread basket 3 rows forward. She placed it in front of a smiling white passenger who looked pleasantly surprised but asked no questions. Danielle watched every movement without saying a word. The silence somehow made the moment louder. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now back to Danielle. The cabin lights glowed softly as the aircraft waited for final clearance to depart Atlanta. Flight attendants moved through first class with polished smiles, but something invisible had already shifted in the air. Danielle slowly lifted her eyes to Claire. "I believe that meal belongs here," she said, her voice steady enough to make the words feel heavier than anger ever could. Claire smiled without warmth. "Premium meals are reserved for verified first-class passengers." Danielle glanced toward the embroidered headrest behind her. "Seat 1A. Her seat. I am a verified first-class passenger." Claire folded her arms. "Then you should probably take that up with customer service after we land." A quiet chuckle came from somewhere across the aisle. Another passenger lowered his newspaper just enough to watch. Danielle reached for her phone, bringing up the digital boarding pass with the confirmation number still glowing across the screen. Claire never looked at it. "Screenshots are easy to fake," she replied. "People try it all the time." Danielle lowered the phone without protest. Her expression never changed. Across the aisle, an older gentleman frowned as if he had just realized something was terribly wrong. A young woman in the second row subtly pointed her phone toward the aisle, not recording yet, simply holding it there. Todd Mercer, another flight attendant, approached carrying a basket of dinner rolls. He glanced at Danielle, then leaned toward Claire with a grin that was just loud enough to be heard. Guess somebody wanted the first-class experience without actually belonging here. A few uncomfortable faces turned away. Others kept staring. Danielle looked directly at Todd. "You may want to remember those words." Todd shrugged. "Why would I?" Danielle rested both hands on the edge of the empty tray table. Her heartbeat never showed in her face. "Because in a few minutes," she said quietly, "every person on this airplane is going to remember them too." Danielle Brooks had boarded flight SC-218 exactly 24 minutes earlier with the same quiet confidence that had carried her through boardrooms, shareholder meetings, and billion-dollar negotiations. She wore no designer labels that announced her status. No security team followed behind her. No executive assistant walked beside her carrying folders or schedules. That was intentional. Over the previous 6 months, Sterling Crown Airlines had received a growing number of customer complaints describing an unsettling pattern. Well-dressed white passengers were consistently offered extra attention, complimentary upgrades, and immediate solutions, while black travelers wearing casual clothing reported being questioned, ignored, or treated as though they did not belong in premium cabins despite holding valid tickets. Every internal review ended with the same conclusion: no evidence of discrimination. Danielle had read every report herself. She had also noticed something else. Nearly all of those investigations relied entirely on statements from the same regional management team. That was why she was sitting alone in seat 1A instead of flying aboard the company aircraft reserved for executive travel. She wanted the truth before anyone realized who she was. The moment she stepped onto the airplane, Claire Whitmore had looked at her boarding pass longer than necessary. Her polite smile never reached her eyes. "Are you sure you are in the correct cabin?" she had asked. Danielle simply smiled and pointed toward seat 1A. Claire checked the boarding pass again before finally stepping aside. 5 minutes later, Todd Mercer passed through the aisle pretending to organize overhead bins while glancing twice toward Danielle. It was the kind of attention that felt less like customer service and more like quiet suspicion. Danielle noticed everything but reacted to nothing. She opened her notebook instead, writing only the flight number, departure time, and the names stitched onto each crew member's uniform. Across the aisle, Ethan Cole had smiled politely before returning to his magazine. Behind Danielle, Sofia Ramirez had slipped into her window seat wearing headphones and never imagined she would become part of anything larger than an ordinary business trip. Boarding continued without incident until Bradley Shaw entered moments before the cabin door closed. He greeted Claire by name. She laughed warmly, thanked him for his loyalty to the airline, and quietly explained that first class was completely full. Bradley nodded with understanding. Then Claire glanced toward Danielle for only a second before leaning closer to Todd. They exchanged a look that lasted less than 2 seconds, but Danielle caught it in the reflection of the cabin window. Todd disappeared into the forward galley carrying his service tablet. When he returned, he was smiling. Danielle did not know what had changed inside the computer system, but she knew something had. The warmth Claire had shown Bradley suddenly disappeared whenever she looked toward seat 1A. During the safety demonstration, Danielle casually opened the airline application on her phone and confirmed that her reservation, seat assignment, and special meal request were all still active. Nothing had changed, at least not on her screen. As boarding officially ended, Claire entered the galley and lowered her voice, believing no passenger could hear through the partially open curtain. "Move the premium meal to Mr. Shaw," she whispered. "Nobody is going to question it." Todd answered with a quiet laugh. "And what about the woman in 1 Alpha?" Claire did not hesitate before replying. "She will get whatever is left." The aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, and the low hum of the engines settled beneath the conversations drifting through the first-class cabin. Danielle Brooks remained exactly where she had been since boarding, calm, composed, quietly observing every detail around her. The service began only minutes after the seatbelt sign was switched off. Claire Whitmore rolled the polished meal cart down the aisle with the confidence of someone who believed she controlled the room. Every passenger received a greeting, a smile, and a choice of beverages. Every passenger except Danielle. Claire stopped beside Bradley Shaw first, although his seat was behind Danielle's. "Good evening, Mr. Shaw. Thank you for your loyalty. Tonight we have the chef's reserve filet or the grilled salmon." Bradley smiled. "The filet sounds perfect." Claire placed the silver tray in front of him with both hands as though presenting an award. Danielle watched quietly. The tray looked identical to the one she had ordered 3 days earlier through Sterling Crown's executive meal program. Todd Mercer followed with the wine service. As he reached Danielle's row, he skipped directly past seat 1A before pouring a glass for Ethan Cole across the aisle. Ethan frowned. "I think you missed her." Todd barely looked up. "She has already been taken care of." Danielle folded her hands together. "Actually, I have not." Todd sighed dramatically before forcing a smile that never looked sincere. "Ma'am, according to our system, there is no premium meal assigned to your reservation." Danielle unlocked her phone and turned the screen toward him. The confirmation number, seat, assignment, and special meal request were clearly displayed. Todd never examined it. "Applications are not always updated," he replied. "Our onboard system is the official record." Danielle asked one simple question. "Would you mind showing me that record?" Claire answered before Todd could speak. "Passenger service information is confidential." Danielle nodded once. "Convenient." The word lingered in the air longer than anyone expected. Across the aisle, Ethan lowered his magazine completely. He had flown often enough to recognize when policies suddenly became selective. Sofia Ramirez quietly removed one earbud and looked toward the front of the cabin. She had been reading a novel only moments earlier, but now her attention never left the exchange. Claire leaned slightly closer to Danielle. Her voice dropped, but not enough to escape nearby passengers. Sometimes mistakes happen during booking. People assume they purchased services they did not actually pay for. Danielle met her eyes without raising her voice. "That would be easy to believe if my name had not been attached to the tray a few minutes ago." Claire's expression tightened for the first time. Todd quickly interrupted. "I do not know what you think you saw." Danielle answered calmly. "I know exactly what I saw." Bradley shifted uncomfortably as he glanced down at the meal sitting in front of him. For the first time, He noticed a faint outline where a name card had recently been removed from the silver tray. His smile faded, but he continued eating without saying a word. Claire immediately redirected the conversation. Is there anything from the economy menu that would be acceptable for you? The sentence landed harder than if she had raised her voice. Several passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan slowly shook his head. Sophia quietly reached for her phone beneath the blanket covering her lap. She did not point it toward anyone yet. She simply opened the camera. Then Danielle looked directly at Claire and spoke with the same steady tone she had maintained since boarding. Before this flight is over, I believe we are all going to discover exactly what your system has been recording and exactly who changed it. Claire forced another smile, but this time even Todd noticed that it did not reach her eyes. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The engines continued their steady rhythm beneath the cabin floor, but the atmosphere inside first class had changed completely. Claire Whitmore straightened her uniform jacket and forced another polished smile, as though confidence alone could erase what had just happened. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced warmly to the surrounding passengers, thank you for your patience. We are simply resolving a reservation discrepancy. Danielle Brooks remained seated, her hands resting calmly on the armrests. There is no discrepancy, she replied. There is only a decision that someone made. Claire ignored her and turned toward Todd Mercer. Please continue the beverage service. Todd nodded quickly, eager to move the attention elsewhere. Yet the room refused to follow his script. Ethan Cole closed his magazine completely and leaned slightly into the aisle. Actually, he said in a measured voice, I saw the label on that meal before it was removed. I remember reading the name Brooks because I thought it was unusual for meals to have personalized cards. Claire looked at him with practiced patience. Sir, I appreciate your concern, but I believe you may have misunderstood what you saw. Ethan did not back down. I have practiced law for 35 years. Reading a name card is not something I usually misunderstand. The quiet confidence in his voice carried farther than any raised argument could have. Several passengers exchanged glances. Sophia Ramirez slowly lowered her headphones and looked toward Danielle. I saw it too, she said. When the tray came out of the galley, it already had a name attached. Then I watched someone remove it. Todd immediately shook his head. That never happened. Sophia answered without emotion. I believe it did. Claire crossed her arms. Unless you have proof, speculation only delays service for everyone else. Sophia looked down at the phone resting in her lap. She hesitated for only a moment before speaking again. I was reading when the cart came out, but I happened to raise my phone. Because I wanted a picture of the sunset outside the window. I may have captured part of what happened by accident. Todd's expression changed for the first time. The easy confidence disappeared from his face. Claire quickly stepped between Sophia and the aisle. There is no need to review personal recordings during a flight. Danielle finally spoke again. She can decide what she wishes to review after we land. Claire answered immediately. Company policy protects our employees from unauthorized recordings. Danielle tilted her head slightly. Company policy also protects passengers from discrimination. The sentence settled over the cabin like unexpected turbulence. No one laughed. No one looked away. Bradley Shaw slowly placed his fork on the edge of the tray. The meal no longer tasted quite as satisfying as it had a few minutes earlier. He looked toward Claire. If there has been some kind of mistake, perhaps she should receive another meal. Claire forced another smile. There are no additional premium meals available. Danielle looked directly at Bradley. This was never about the meal. Ethan nodded quietly. No, it is about deciding who deserves respect before you know who they are. Claire's composure began to crack. She turned sharply toward the forward galley. Todd, please contact the captain. Todd disappeared behind the curtain without another word. Less than a minute later, the intercom chimed softly. Then the curtain opened again, and Captain Richard Hale stepped into the first-class cabin with a serious expression, unaware that every pair of eyes was now watching to see which version of the story he was about to believe. Captain Richard Hale stepped into the first-class cabin with the calm authority of someone who believed the situation was already understood. He looked toward Claire Whitmore first, then Todd Mercer, and finally Danielle Brooks sitting quietly in seat 1A. What seems to be the issue, he asked. Claire answered immediately. This passenger is creating confusion over a meal request and refusing to accept our explanation. Danielle looked at the captain and noticed something important. He had not asked Ethan what he saw. He He had not asked Sophia what she recorded. He had not checked the service log. He had simply accepted the first version of the story. "Captain," Danielle said calmly, "I have a confirmed first-class reservation, a confirmed meal request, and witnesses who saw my assigned meal removed." Richard looked uncomfortable but remained focused on Claire's report. "Miss Brooks, my crew says there was a misunderstanding. The best solution is to avoid further disruption." Danielle held his gaze. Avoiding disruption is not the same as correcting a mistake. The cabin became completely silent. Claire stepped forward. "She is refusing to cooperate." Ethan immediately responded from across the aisle. "That is not what happened." Richard turned toward him. "Sir, please allow the crew to handle this." Ethan slowly nodded, but his expression showed disappointment. The message was clear. The system was protecting itself before finding the truth. Todd returned from the galley carrying a small packaged meal from economy class. He placed it on Danielle's tray table with a polite expression that felt rehearsed. "This is the alternative option available." Danielle looked down at the package, then back at him. "An alternative option after my original meal was reassigned." Todd avoided answering. Claire folded her arms. "At this point, we need you to decide whether you want to continue your journey peacefully or create a larger issue." Those words stayed in the air. They were not loud. They did not need to be. Danielle had heard versions of them before. Suddenly, the cabin around her seemed to fade for a moment. She remembered being 17 years old, standing beside her mother inside an airport restaurant in Charlotte. They had paid for their meals, waited patiently, and watched other customers receive service while they were ignored. When her mother finally asked about the delay, the response was not an apology. It was a suggestion that they should come back another time. Danielle remembered the look on her mother's face. Not anger, not defeat, just the quiet realization that some people had already decided who they were before they ever spoke. That moment stayed with Danielle for decades. It became part of every company policy she created, every employee she hired, and every standard she refused to lower. Back on the airplane, Danielle returned to the present. She looked around the cabin at the passengers watching quietly. "I have given everyone here several opportunities to correct this situation," she said. "I have provided my information. I have answered every question. But now, I need something different." Claire raised an eyebrow. "And what would that be?" Danielle reached toward her smartwatch and touched the screen once. Her voice remained calm. A complete record. A few seconds later, her device connected. Somewhere on the ground, someone answered immediately. "Ms. Brooks, we have been monitoring the situation. Do you want us to activate the preservation protocol?" Danielle looked toward Claire, Todd, and Captain Hale. For the first time that evening, they realized the woman in seat 1A was not asking for help. She was documenting everything. "Yes," Danielle said quietly. "Activate it." The moment Danielle Brooks activated the preservation protocol, the atmosphere inside the first-class cabin changed. Nothing dramatic happened on the surface. No one raised their voice. No one moved from their seat. But everyone felt that something had shifted. Claire Whitmore looked at Danielle with a confused expression, as if she was still trying to understand why this passenger remained so calm. "Who exactly did you call?" Claire asked. Danielle placed her smartwatch back beside her seat. "Someone who records facts before opinions can change them." Captain Richard Hale glanced toward Claire. "What does that mean?" Claire answered quickly. "It means she is escalating a simple service issue." Danielle looked at him. "A service issue where my assigned meal was removed, my reservation was questioned, and witnesses were ignored." Richard paused. For the first time, he looked less certain. He turned toward Todd Mercer. "Did you move the meal?" Todd hesitated for a fraction of a second. "I followed the service adjustment from the system." Danielle noticed the wording. Not a denial. An explanation. "Then the system will show who made the adjustment," she said. Claire stepped in immediately. "Captain, we do not have time to investigate every passenger complaint during a flight." Danielle looked around the cabin. "That is exactly how complaints disappear." The sentence landed quietly, but Ethan Cole nodded from across the aisle. Sofia Ramirez kept her phone lowered, waiting. She understood what Danielle understood. The important part was not proving who had the loudest voice. It was preserving what actually happened. On the ground, Monica Reed opened the secure company channel from her office in Chicago. Her voice came through Danielle's smartwatch, clear and professional. "Danielle, the preservation process has started. The catering records are locked. The cabin service logs are secured. No further changes can be made. Claire's expression changed. Danielle. The name came out differently this time. Not as a challenge. As a question. Danielle did not answer immediately. Monica continued. We have also pulled the original meal assignment from the reservation system. It was confirmed 48 hours before departure. Todd looked toward Claire. How did you know her name? Claire asked. Danielle finally looked directly at her. Because you should have asked before deciding. The cabin became still again. Monica continued with the next update. There is another issue. The system shows the meal assignment was manually changed 12 minutes after boarding. Captain Hale looked at Todd. Who authorized that? No one answered. The silence was more revealing than any explanation. Claire attempted to regain control. This is being taken out of context. Danielle shook her head slowly. No. The context was there from the beginning. You just assumed nobody would look closely. Monica's voice returned. Danielle, I have one more thing. We reviewed recent service complaints connected to this crew. Danielle's expression remained steady, but the passengers noticed the slight change in her eyes. And Monica paused. There are 11 previous complaints with similar details. Premium passengers questioned. Service denied. Concerns dismissed. Ethan lowered his magazine completely. Sophia looked at Danielle, realizing this was bigger than one meal. Danielle looked out the airplane window at the clouds below. She had hoped this was only one person's poor judgment. But the records were showing something different. Claire looked around the cabin, sensing that the situation had moved beyond her control. Then Monica delivered the final update. Danielle, the board is requesting confirmation. They want to know if you want to proceed with a full crew review before this aircraft continues. Danielle looked back at the people standing in front of her. The same people who had decided she did not belong. Her voice remained calm. Yes, she said. Begin the review. For the first time since boarding, Claire Whitmore had no immediate response. The confidence that had carried her through the cabin began to fade as the reality of the situation became impossible to ignore. The passenger she had dismissed as someone who did not belong was now the person directing the investigation. Captain Richard Hale looked toward Danielle Brooks, still trying to understand the shift happening in front of him. You are saying you are connected to this review? He asked. Danielle remained seated. I am saying the facts should be reviewed before anyone decides who is right. The answer was simple, but everyone in the cabin understood what it meant. Monica Reed's voice returned through the smartwatch. Danielle, the board has joined the secure channel. Grant Wilson is also standing by. Claire's eyes narrowed at the name. Grant Wilson was the company's chief operating officer, the person responsible for approving major operational decisions across Sterling Crown Airlines. Todd Mercer stepped closer to Claire and lowered his voice. Who is she? Claire did not answer. She looked at Danielle differently now. Not with certainty, with doubt. Danielle noticed the change, but did not react. She had seen it many times before. Some people only reconsidered respect after discovering someone had power. But the real question was whether they would have shown respect without knowing. Ethan Cole watched the exchange carefully. You know, he said quietly. That is the part people always miss. The treatment changes when they learn who someone is. But the question is why it was different before. No one responded. The word stayed there. Heavy. Honest. Sophia Ramirez looked down at her phone and reviewed the recording she had accidentally captured earlier. The video showed the service card arriving. It showed the meal card attached to the tray. It showed Claire removing it. It showed Todd taking the tray away. Every moment that had been explained away now had a timestamp. Claire noticed Sophia looking at the screen. You cannot use a personal recording against employees, she said. Sophia looked up. I am not trying to hurt anyone. I am showing what happened. Danielle nodded slightly. That is the difference. Captain Hale took a breath and finally turned toward Claire. Why was the meal reassigned? Claire looked uncomfortable. There was confusion. Danielle replied calmly. Confusion does not explain changing records. Monica interrupted softly. Danielle, we have confirmation. The cabin became silent. The original catering request was approved under executive authorization. The meal was not missing. It was moved manually after boarding. Richard looked toward the crew. Who moved it? Again, silence. Todd looked at Claire. Claire looked away. The answer was becoming clearer without anyone saying it. Then the aircraft intercom chimed. A message from the ground team appeared on the captain's tablet. Grant Wilson was requesting immediate access to the aircraft upon arrival back at the gate. Richard looked at Danielle. Why would the chief operating officer come personally for a meal dispute? Danielle finally stood from seat 1A. Her movement was calm, controlled, and completely different from the image they had created of her. Because this was never about a meal. She looked around the first-class cabin. It was about what happens when someone believes they can decide who deserves respect. Claire took one step back. For the first time that evening, she understood something important. The woman she had judged in seconds had been watching everything from the beginning. And now, the entire company was watching too. The aircraft returned to the gate 20 minutes later, but the first class cabin no longer felt like the same place where Danielle Brooks had been questioned over a meal. The quiet tension had transformed into something different. Everyone was waiting for the truth to arrive. When the cabin door opened, Grant Wilson stepped inside with two members of the operations team and a legal representative from Sterling Crown Airlines. Claire Whitmore immediately stood straighter, trying to recover the confidence she had carried earlier. "Mr. Wilson, thank you for coming," she said quickly. "There has been a difficult passenger situation." Grant looked past her and toward Danielle. His expression changed instantly. Not surprise. Recognition. He walked forward and nodded respectfully. "Ms. Brooks." The entire cabin went silent. Claire's face changed. Todd Mercer stopped moving. Captain Richard Hale looked between them, realizing the person he had been asked to manage was actually the person responsible for the company's direction. Danielle did not celebrate the moment. She simply said, "Thank you for coming, Grant." Claire tried to speak. "Wait, you know her?" Grant looked at Claire. "Yes. Everyone responsible for operations should know our chief executive officer." The words landed across the cabin like a final piece of a puzzle falling into place. Ethan Cole slowly leaned back in his seat. Sophia Ramirez lowered her phone. Even Bradley Shaw looked uncomfortable as he stared at the untouched meal in front of him. Danielle turned toward the crew. "This is not happening because you failed to recognize me." Her voice remained calm. "It is happening because you failed to respect someone you thought had no influence." Grant received a digital report from Monica Reed. He reviewed the timeline carefully. The catering record confirms the meal was assigned correctly. The service log confirms the change happened after boarding. The employee access record confirms the adjustment was made manually. He looked toward Claire. "Can you explain why?" Claire searched for an answer. "It was a misunderstanding." Grant shook his head slightly. "A misunderstanding does not include altered records." Todd quietly stepped forward. "I only followed instructions." Danielle looked at him. "That is exactly the problem. Following instructions without questioning unfair treatment is how these situations continue." Captain Hale removed his hat and looked down at the report in his hands. "I should have reviewed the information before making assumptions." Danielle acknowledged him with a small nod. "That is how accountability begins." Grant continued reading. "There is also another matter. The previous complaints connected to this crew have been reviewed. 11 passengers reported similar experiences. Different flights, different dates, similar patterns." The cabin became completely still. Claire looked around. Realizing this was no longer a disagreement she could explain away. It was a record of decisions. Danielle looked toward the passengers who had witnessed everything. Today was not about one dinner service. It was about whether a person receives dignity only after proving they have power. Ethan quietly said, "That is the lesson people need to hear." Grant closed the report. "Ms. Brooks, the board is requesting your decision." Danielle looked at Claire, Todd, Natalie, and Captain Hale. There was no anger in her expression, only certainty. "Remove their access from the system," she said. "Begin the employment review immediately." A notification appeared on Grant's tablet. One by one, the crew access badges changed status. The people who had controlled the cabin minutes earlier were now waiting for the company they represented to decide their future. Danielle looked toward the empty first-class tray table in front of her. The meal had never been the point. The choice they made was. And now everyone on that airplane was about to see the consequences. The first-class cabin remained quiet after the final access notifications appeared on Grant Wilson's tablet. No one celebrated. No one needed to. The truth had already changed the room. Moments earlier, Danielle Brooks had been treated like someone who needed to prove she belonged. Now, everyone understood she had been the person responsible for deciding what belonging should look like inside Sterling Crown Airlines. Claire Whitmore stood near the galley, staring at the report. In Grant's hands, the confidence she carried at the beginning of the flight was gone. In its place was the realization that every decision, every comment, and every assumption had been recorded. Danielle looked at her calmly. Claire, do you understand what happened here? Claire remained silent for several seconds before answering. I made a mistake. Danielle nodded slightly. A mistake is forgetting a name. A mistake is missing a request. What happened here was a choice. The words were not angry. They were simply true. Grant continued the review with the board still connected through the secure system. Claire, Todd Mercer, Natalie Price, and Captain Richard Hale were placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. Their system access was suspended while the company reviewed every previous complaint connected to their service records. Bradley Shaw quietly stood and approached Danielle. The confidence he had carried earlier was replaced by discomfort. I should have said something, he admitted. Danielle looked at him. That moment matters too. Sometimes silence protects the person causing the problem. Bradley lowered his head. You are right. Across the cabin, Ethan Cole smiled slightly. The most powerful thing about this was that you never had to prove yourself. Danielle looked toward him. That is the lesson. People should not have to reveal their title before they receive basic respect. Sofia Ramirez saved the recording and handed it to the legal representative. I almost did not say anything, she admitted. Danielle smiled gently. But you did. That matters. The flight continued later with a replacement crew, but before departure, Danielle made one final announcement to the passengers. She did not stand in the center of the cabin like someone demanding attention. She simply spoke from seat 1A, the same seat where the entire situation had begun. Today showed us something important. A company is not defined by its aircraft, its offices, or its profits. It is defined by how people are treated when nobody thinks they are important. She announced that Sterling Crown Airlines would reopen previous customer complaints, create independent service reviews, and require additional training focused on fairness, accountability, and equal treatment for every passenger. The passengers listened quietly. Then Ethan began to clap. Sophia joined. Slowly, the entire first-class cabin followed. Danielle did not smile because she had won a personal battle. She smiled because something larger had changed. She had walked onto that airplane hoping to discover whether the problem was one employee or a deeper culture. She found the answer. But she also found something else. People were willing to stand for what was right when they were given the chance. As the aircraft finally prepared for takeoff, Danielle looked out the window at the runway stretching ahead. Years earlier, she had been told that certain spaces were not meant for people like her. She had heard those words many times, but she never allowed them to define her destination. Because true power was never about sitting in the most expensive seat, wearing the most impressive title, or making everyone know your name. True power was walking into a room where people underestimated you and leaving behind a standard they could never ignore. Danielle Brooks did not need to raise her voice to change the flight. She only needed the truth to arrive. And once it did, everyone understood who had been in control all along.